You're listening to Dennis Hall. Let's start with the big news. The government is reported to be backpedalling on its commitment to overhaul planning laws that were designed to speed up building projects with a target of 300,000 homes a year being built in England. Part of the government's Project Speed, these new planning laws were announced in the Queen's speech with the objective of simplifying the system and increasing the number of homes being planned by more than a third. The planning reforms have been met with massive criticism from countryside campaigners who said the changes would lead to the suburbanisation of green areas. The proposals will now be abandoned in light of the backlash from southern voters and MPs. The new laws would have given councils mandatory house building targets and stopped homeowners from being able to object to planning applications by creating a new zonal system. It is perhaps no surprise then that Robert Jenrick was sacked last week in the cabinet reshuffle. The new care home vaccination regulations are the first explicit provision in English law to make a person's COVID vaccination status a characteristic that affects their eligibility to carry out employment-related activities. Subject to a number of exceptions, the new regulations in effect make vaccination mandatory for all those undertaking work activities in care homes, save for a number of limited circumstances. The regulations bar entry to regulated care homes for all those who have not received a complete course of vaccination against COVID-19, unless they fall into an accepted category. The new regulations achieve this by laying a new responsibility on a designated responsible person at each care home in order to ensure compliance. The government is currently consulting upon whether similar provisions should apply elsewhere in the public sector. Scrutiny is in the news once again. The Institute for Governance last week published its Parliamentary Monitor Report for 2021, and it contains some key concerns on the scrutiny of emerging legislation. The report says that government must drop its dismissive approach to scrutiny and oversight. The report finds that the efforts of MPs to hold ministers to account during the last parliamentary session were impeded by ministers' frequent use of emergency powers and the sidelining of Parliament. Now, while the need to legislate rapidly was understandable at the start of the COVID pandemic, the new government tried to avoid scrutiny and push through legislation on issues that went beyond the pandemic, including giving MPs just one day to debate its Brexit trade bill. Now, the message is clear for our sector too. Scrutiny really is both integral and necessary to effective policy development. Licensing lawyers will be keen to follow the journey through Parliament of the Taxis and Private Hire Vehicles Bill, which had its second reading last week. The LGA welcomes this bill, which would make it mandatory for licensing authorities to access vital background information about drivers seeking a license in their areas. This will support the work of councils to ensure anyone using a taxi or private hire vehicle is kept safe. This bill aims to build on work carried out by the LGA to address the issue of taxi drivers losing a license in one area, but then applying for a license in another area, without declaring their previous licensing history. These changes have significant implications for improving community safety. This bill is seen as a first positive step in what is perceived as updating obsolete legislation. If you're involved in elections, then there is something you simply must read. Take a look at the letter sent to Cabinet Office Minister Chloe Smith by the Association of Electoral Administrators and Solace. It's about proposals to amend election legislation to reduce the general election timetable from 25 to 17 days. These plans have been put forward by the Joint Committee that is examining reform of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. The changes have caused alarm in local government circles, and the proposal is simply not achievable within our current electoral system, they say. Should this change be enacted, the organisations argue that it could lead to voter disenfranchisement, the catastrophic failure of elections, and also a loss of public confidence in our electoral and democratic process. Now, you can get much more on this and all the articles mentioned in this week's podcast by going to Bulletin 35, available now on the LLG website. This week, you've been listening to Dennis Hall, LLG's Bulletin Editor.